Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Coronite.com. Today is Wednesday 4th of January 2017, and today I want to address something which is in my mailbox quite a lot, and the underlying thought is, now I've decided to serve God alone, my life is falling apart. There's only really one way I can give you my thoughts on this, and that's to give you something of my own experience. I don't tend to talk about my own past or my own life, not because I'm shy of it or anything like that, but because I don't see the point in kind of going on about oneself or glorifying or in some way dramatizing a past. I'm more interested in what I'm doing now, but because of this question, and I'm getting it a lot, that I think that it's worth me addressing this. So I suppose in some way this would be something along the lines of what a Christian would call a testimony. It's a part of my history, but I suppose also some of the lessons that I've learned from my life. So it's not meant to be in any way a sort of one size fits all. We're all different people, we all have different experiences, but these are mine, and at the time I was going through them I thought I was the only person, or as we all do. But having come through the other side of quite a lot of this, I can see that this is a pattern, and from my reading of the Quran I see too that we should expect hardship, that the prizes of God don't come free. And when one starts on this path, certain things change. They kind of have to. So I'm not in any way telling anyone or everyone what they should do. I do believe that whom God guides, he is guided. But I'm sharing my own experience, and if it's of some benefit to you, then that's great. So here goes. I'm going to start when I was around about 29, which is when I first got married. And I married a woman who's a very good person, but she doesn't have faith in God. And she and I were friends, I think, primarily. And we lived in Moscow at that time. She's Russian. And I decided to get married because I was quite cynical about the concept of love, or love as we call it, because I could see that this whole packaged kind of fake love is fake. But I didn't understand that it's possible to have a spiritual affinity and a cooperation with a woman who also believes in God. I didn't know this was possible. So I married somebody whom I respected and I liked, and she and I got married. And however, within myself, I felt that I had missed something. And it wasn't wanderlust or anything like that. I just knew that I had a mission. I can't put it any other way. Just to give you some context, I'm 49 now, so this is whatever that is, 20 years ago. I've always had a very strong sense of mission. This isn't some sort of exalted sense of my own worth. I just always knew I had something that I was meant to do. And I'd always assumed that everybody had this. But I've come to understand that they don't. But I do. And this, almost like a splinter in my essence, grew and wouldn't let me have peace. I felt that I'd missed something. I felt that I'd missed the point of what I was meant to do. There was an American philosopher and writer called Thoreau who wrote a book called Walden, which is quite difficult to read actually, but I think it's in Walden. He says that the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, and that's true. especially in this type of society, which is predicated upon no meaning above that, just sort of an economic value. My wife and I had a son. I poured myself into him, into educating him, looking after him, and I spent a lot of time with him. And he and I were very close. In fact, I actually delivered him, the birth. So from cutting the umbilical cord to teaching him to read, ride bikes, speak languages, etc., I was very closely connected with him. So I was a hands-on father, if you want to put it that way. However, I just felt that I was missing the thing I was meant to do. My first wife, as I say, she's not a bad person. It's not about claiming someone is bad or this, that. No. But as I learnt, as I began to read and reflect upon the Quran, that it's very clear that we shouldn't be married to unbelievers. And they do call you to the fire. They just do. And if your inclination is towards God and you are, to use a Christian, I'm sorry, I come from a Christian background, so unequally yoked with unbelievers, then I think the metaphor unequally yoked is extremely apposite, because when you yoke two oxen together, unless they are of the same size and pulling in the same direction, they're just going to use all of their energy fighting each other. And I mean, for myself, with my first wife, we didn't fight, we didn't argue. I barely raised my voice. It's much quieter than that. One person fundamentally wants to go in one direction, and the other person fundamentally wants to go in another direction. And the Quran is, as in all things, it is correct. They do call you to the fire. I didn't know these subtleties at that time. I just knew that I was failing to deliver on what I was meant to do, what I was born to do. And I felt that, and it was, as Thoreau says, a life of quiet desperation. And it sucks the strength out of you, and it sucks your own hope and joy out of you, because hardship's hard enough as it is. And as I go through this little talk, you'll get a sense of the fact that hardship didn't go away. In fact, it increased. However, if you are at least not yoked unequally, even if you're just on your own, and even better if you are yoked to a believing spouse, then when the hardships come, and they will come, as I'll get into, somehow God gives you grace for it. Anyway, when my son Vasya got to 8 years old, I helped my now ex-mother-in-law buy a flat near to my wife at that time and our flat. And once she was ensconced there and my son was in school, I left. I divorced my wife, and I made it very clear to her. I said to her, I'm not leaving you for somebody else. I'm just leaving you. I cannot, I'm not doing what I'm meant to do. I have to. And I gave her the house, which was my entire possession. I have nothing else. And went into rented accommodation and continued to see my son on a regular basis, and stayed in Moscow, which frankly I didn't want to stay in. It's a very hard city. It's a tough city. It's a Klondike kind of place. It's great if you're 20 and up for panning for gold and shooting people. But I mean shooting people in a metaphorical sense. It's not it's not like that now. But it's a tough place. And had it not been for my son, I would have left. And it's tough on your health as well. It's a very difficult city to live in for long periods of time. So I stayed. And what was interesting was, in one way, a lot of things got easier. Now, at this point, I'm not leading some deep spiritual life. I just basically unyoked myself from somebody who was pulling in a direction I didn't know, I knew I didn't want to go. And I just went crazy for about 4 years. I'd been living a very repressed life in all ways for as long as I was married, which was we were together for 12 years. It wasn't like I just sort of gave up after 6 months. No, I'm a fighter, but I realized that this isn't going to go anywhere. And not only is it not going to go anywhere, I'm destroying the thing that God had given me to do. And this isn't some sort of artistic caprice. I knew this to be a fact. And if the person that you are closest to fundamentally rejects, denies, or refuses to acknowledge this in you, then why are they with you? There's no point. It was hugely difficult. I mean, I'm just sort of glossing over a lot here and skipping through the details, but this is real life and it's really tough. And it was. So my son at that time was 8 and I stayed in Moscow. And I decided to throw myself into work. And having unyoked myself, suddenly I had all this amazing energy that I hadn't had for years. And my career went actually great. And I doubled my income. I then doubled it again and doubled it again and doubled it again in a very short order, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, something like that. I went from job to job, which you could do in Moscow at that time, and just went from being basically a translator, sort of article writer, translator, to I was a director of a public relations company in just a year or two. It was phenomenal, and I enjoyed it. And I had money, and I found it very easy to get good jobs. I was dealing with very successful people as clients. They were my clients. They weren't my friends. They were my clients. And it's intoxicating. It's deceptive in another way. And as I reflected on this, I still felt the same thing that I'd felt in my marriage. It's this, I'm fundamentally denying something. A good way of putting it is those magic eye pictures. I mean, you can look at those magic eye pictures with all the dots, and a lot of people just see dots, and they're not lying. They do just see dots. But if you do see the Eiffel Tower or whatever it is, you are a liar if you pretend that you don't. And I've always been able to see the underlying image, as it were. So even in my work, and it was a different kind of loneliness, I think, being feted and praised and all of that for doing something that deep down I didn't think was important, especially when a lot of people want to get into that line of business. For example, public relations. I mean, what is it really? You're just sort of, it's sort of informational prostitution combined with restaurant service. It's ghastly. You're just a resource for rich people. And thankfully, thank God, I didn't have to do anything that I didn't, that caused me a problem with my conscience. I had 2 main clients, both of whom are very famous in Russia, very successful people. And one of them I liked a lot, and the other one, the fact that I didn't particularly like him didn't matter. I didn't have to do anything that I really hated. But I knew that I might have to, not for those clients, but for new clients. I mean, if you're working in public relations, you just deal with all kinds of people. I mean, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. And I knew that there were tunes I wasn't going to dance to. And I planned my escape. I didn't quite know what I was going to do, but I knew that in some ways, a bit like my first marriage, this thing was sucking the life out of me. It's almost like living in a house where there's a gas leak. You can smell the gas, but it's not killing you yet, but you know that it's going to. So you either have to leave the house or do something fundamental with the gas, but you trying to coexist with a leaking gas pipe isn't going to go well. So I decided to set up my own business, which I did, which meant that I didn't have to be involved in the strategy behind public relations. And I could provide services to people that I knew without having to feel that I was in any way culpable for what they were doing. although this, in some ways, this was an underutilization of my skills, it meant that I could sleep better. And so I did that. And at the same time, I worked on radio, which I enjoyed a lot, actually. It was great. And again, it wasn't something that was, I would say, was my highest calling. But I didn't feel compromised. And that's got, I hate this expression, but it has, for me, it has a very high dollar value. I want to feel that I'm doing the right thing with my life. I've always had a very strong sense of my own mortality, and I've known people who are now dead, many, so I'm always aware of that. Nevertheless, even with this, and I suppose in some ways I was planning my escape from Moscow, with this translation business, I set it up in such a way that I could basically take it anywhere in the world. And as I say, I was going through a crazy time on all sorts of fronts, and I don't make a big deal out of it, but it's true. I went nuts with women as well. And again, this resulted in a new form of loneliness, a new type of loneliness. You realizing it reminds me a little bit of the book of Ecclesiastes, which is frankly my favorite book in the entire Bible. If I had to take one book from the Bible, it would be this one. It's a book of great wisdom. And anyone who hasn't read the book of Ecclesiastes, I recommend read it. It's and pay particular attention to the conclusion, and don't go straight to the back either. Read it. It's a book of phenomenal wisdom. And a part of the book of Ecclesiastes, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, saith the preacher. And Solomon, as it were, tests these life by madness, by folly, and he comes to realize that it is all vanity. And this was my process of testing and finding that it is all vanity. However, I had a background of knowledge of scripture, including the Quran, and I knew that I wanted to serve God. And part of my finding this out was one client that I had, who I'm not going to name him, but he's a billionaire. He's a phenomenally successful, in inverted commas, industrialist in Russia. And I just happened through my work, this was not a friend of mine, a personal friend of mine. He didn't like me, actually. I didn't particularly like him either. I found him interesting, but he isn't somebody I would want to hang out with. But just being around him, and for various reasons I spent a lot of time around him, and around him in an environment where he had to be quite candid, talking about himself. It was a form of media training. And seeing his life up close and personal. Here was this guy with, I don't know, a lot, I can't remember. I think he was worth about 18 or 19 billion dollars at this point. And he's an incredibly intelligent guy. But it all seemed very empty. It all seemed pointless, frankly. When you've seen the inside of one Gulfstream private jet, you've kind of seen them all. And eating at the best tables and flying in the best jets and staying in the best hotels, I heard people talking, and I realized that there really isn't anything much new under the sun. The kind of boasting, and I'm not talking about this particular individual, but the people around him, parts of his entourage at different times, boasting about what kind of hotels they'd stayed in, and the kind of conversations. It was just what you get anywhere, but with several zeros added to the end. So I realized that it doesn't really make any difference. Again, going back to Ecclesiastes, the poor man, dies, the rich man dies. There is no difference. And I reached a state of the quiet desperation that Thoreau talks about. And I realized that there is no out except to God. And it wasn't that I was unhappy. It wasn't that my life was terrible. I still had a good relationship, very good relationship with my son, and was in close contact with him. My work life was going great. Moscow, especially at that time, if you're interested in women, you're just basically like a child in a candy shop. So in terms of carnal and material pleasures, a lot of people would have been very happy with what I had. I had a job that was considered successful. I just hated it all. I just thought it was empty. And this feeling of the emptiness and the pointlessness of it all was exacerbated by being around people who seemed very happy with it. And I think this is the fundamental distinction. And it goes as far as, just a slight sort of aside here, it goes as far as religions. I mean, people who are happy and snug in religions of any shape and form. And I've done a lot of research recently into Mormonism for various reasons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology. It's a slightly different case, but people who are safe in their cultures, in their little dogmas, and never really have to question any of it, they are threatened by people who do question it. Because to go back to the Quran again says God either guides, if God guides, you are guided. Well, religions don't have room for that. They don't. So if you begin to throw your lot onto the boat named I'm going to trust God and no one else, then the world is not going to go, cool. No, that's not going to happen. So anyway, to move things along, I pretty much decided that although I didn't know what I was going to do, I was going to basically close down things. And as far as women were concerned, I just had enough of the whole thing. I just thought I'm going to go and live in a monastery or something. I mean, maybe not a Christian monastery, but somewhere a long way away. And there are plenty of places a long way away in Russia. This was certainly doable. But I met my wife, and absolutely I'd had enough. But we happened to meet, and we got on fantastically well. But not just got on fantastically well. And you have to understand, I'm pretty jaded by this point. But she had what I had but was losing, which is a sense of my own purpose. She had it in a different way. She was just still as yet not jaded, and reminded me of what it was that I was really about. And I was at this time already reading the Quran again, and with new eyes, and thinking about things on my own. And in some ways, she just gave me a second, like a shot in the arm, a new lease of life. And I told her about the Quran, what I'd learnt from it. I'm not talking, in any sort of pastoral role, but just as a friend at that point. And we both talked about what, for me, is the most important thing, which is God and the meaning of it all. I don't mean in some after-dinner sense, sitting there sort of swishing some Beaujolais round the bottom of a wine glass, pontificating on the meaning of life, smoking cigars. I mean in a real sense. What are we here for? Why? What are we going to do with our lives? And we got married very quickly. And we decided that we wanted to live right before God. I can't really put it in any firmer terms than that. We began to read the Quran together. Neither of us came from Islamic backgrounds. We could both see, and I'm not being nasty about Christians or anything, but the Christian Bible as an entire entity doesn't do it for me. There are bits that I've got huge respect for, but it isn't one thing. It's not cut from the same cloth, let's put it that way. Whereas the Quran, the Quran is, there's no doubt about it. She and I knew that we had to get out of Moscow, because the city, it's a great city in some ways, but it's incredibly sinful, to use a plain speaking word. And it's not like we had this complete plan. We just knew that we had to get somewhere clean or cleaner. So you can't just pull out of a place where you've got your life. So it took us a year to finish everything, tie up all the loose ends and all of that, and decide to leave. So we did. And with my son, who was he was 13, going on 14 at this point, and I knew that was the first point at which I began to realize that how right I'd been. No matter how difficult it was to leave and to divorce my first wife because of my son, that I realized that my son was beginning to see me turn my ship around. And had I stayed there, had I stayed with my first wife, she'd have finished me off. I mean, she would have sucked out every last part of my soul. And she would have done it without noticing. These people are different to you. They're not in some ways bad people. I'm sure a lot of people who know them think they're fine people. But if you are called to God, you will find these people irksome to you. You can't not, because what they want and what you want, they're completely different things. You are unequally yoked. And from their point of view, they think you're just being difficult or capricious. However, from your point of view, you've got a soul that you bear a responsibility for that soul before God, and you simply don't have anything in common with these people fundamentally. So when I met and married my second wife, suddenly all of this stuff at home was completely different, and God became the focus of it. So in that case, in that sense, I feel incredibly blessed to have met my wife. Now, this is the point at which I suppose everybody goes, oh, fantastic, now everything's happy and you live happily ever after. No, it's not what happened. We decided to take things to the next stage. Anyway, we were in Spain. We lived in Spain for a while, and for about 6 months I had basically a holiday and just got my health back after 15 years of living in Russia. And it was when we were in Spain, but at this time I've got this translation business which is beginning to suffer from, as all businesses were suffering, from the sanctions by the Americans against Ukraine and then against Russia. So what I was providing was very high-end, high-quality services, very quick, for public relations companies. And when they're looking at their budgets, they're going, we're paying this guy 8 times more than we pay this guy. Suddenly quality isn't such an issue, and they start cutting those things down. So my income stream was going down. But I had some money, but I could feel that, my income was going down, and it put a pressure on you. These are just life things that are happening. And there was this point where I'm very focused on, I want to provide for my family, I want to provide for my wife, I want her to be happy. And she could see that something was the matter with me. And I just told her, I said, these are the things that are happening. But what I really feel, what I want to do is I want to do this work with the Quran. I knew that the Quran, just because of what I'd already studied, is the word of God. I knew this. But I could see, because of my other studies, what's happened to this and this creation of this religion, etc. And I wanted to do something about it. And we had this conversation. This was, I suppose, the big decision point. We were living in a place called Xeraco, which is in Valencia region in Spain, living on the beach, actually, with our daughter then, who was about 1. And she said, I want you to do this project, no matter what. And this weight fell off my shoulders. She wanted that more than, money and provision and safety and all of that stuff. She wanted God first. And it was at this point that I thought, I've married the right woman this time. And so we made the decision. We are going to follow this. We're going to pin our colours to the mast. So it wasn't like we're living in this really safe, wonderful environment. Now we're going to serve God. No, we were in a country she didn't have any proper documentation for, or was on a very, unclear basis with a very small child. The income's going down, but we're going to do this. Okay, fantastic. So We moved to a different city because, Valencia is a lovely place to have a holiday in, but it's nowhere to live. There's no education. There's nothing there. It's just oranges and sunshine and parking fines. There's nothing else. So we moved to a place called Salamanca, which is, I wanted my daughter to, I thought, right, English and Russian at home, Spanish, real Spanish at school if she goes to school. So she's going to have 3 languages. So even if the education's rubbish, at least she's got 3 languages. Anyway, we go there. Now I'm going to do the project. This is, where are we? We're 2013. So now I'm ready to serve God. Fantastic. The whole thing is, the decks are cleared. Let's start. And I got sick, and I got really sick. I had bronchitis, pneumonia. I was just ill. I was bedridden for 4 months. No money coming in. It's really tough. We've got no benefits, no friends, nothing, living in this place, paying rent every month out of my savings, living off your savings. The money from the business is basically going down to nothing. But I'd started serving God. Where's the big fanfare? Where is all the help? 4 months we were sick. My wife got sick as well. Our child got sick. 3 of us in a foreign country. We know the language to a certain extent, but not well enough to negotiate fine points. No help, no friends, nothing. 4 months. Plus we're paying nursery for the child. Savings, not a huge amount. And I began to get worried. I think, I've got this certain amount of money. If we carry on like this, we're going to have nowhere. So I went online and I looked, and I just thought, we buy a little house. We don't need a big house. Buy a little house in Spain. At least we've got a house, even if it takes the little money that we've got left. So that's what we did. So I find a guy. I buy a house. There's an English guy in a town in Spain, in the south of Spain. English guy. He's your friend. He wants to help you. He's going to help you with the Spanish bureaucracy and all this stuff. Martin, if you're listening, hello, Martin. The guy's a crook. He's a criminal, and he took our money. He took all of it, and he was a nasty piece of work. But he talked the talk. He was a Christian. You see, that was his selling point. He was a Christian, and he's your friend, and he's from England. Blah blah blah. There's quite a lot more to it. I'm not an idiot, and I have lived in different places and met a lot of dodgy people. But this guy, he was born to steal my money. There was a lot more to it about Martin and about his background and reasons why I wanted to trust him. And I wanted to trust him. Long story short, he's got our house and our money, and it's quite clear that we're not going to get either of them back. So we are in a foreign country with no house and no money. I've got a young wife, young child. Got to make a decision. So basically closed that house. I went to a solicitor, formed a contract to force this guy for him to sign to get our money back. Anyway, long story short, he never did. Forget about that. And I took my wife out of that environment immediately because I was worried about this guy. I mean, he's dangerous. So that was the first thing. I did that before anything else. And then I put her on a plane because she couldn't come to England at this point. She didn't have documentation, so she can't just go to England, which is where I'm from. So she has to go back to Russia. So I put her and the child on a plane to Russia, and then I go to England to sort things out. So this is after we've decided to serve God. I now have got no money, no house. My wife is in a foreign country. My child, whom I love, is I'm separated from both my wife and my child, and I'm living with my own mother, in the attic. This is what happens, and I just carried on. I just did the project anyway. What I'm trying to say is that when you start to serve God, that's the kind of thing that is going to happen. It isn't easy. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm going to serve God. Oh yeah, and suddenly there's a big fanfare and everything's great. I have alluded to this before, but what I've come to realize is that my experience is actually standard. Anyway, so I'm working literally 18 hours a day on this project upstairs. I'm at the same time sorting out things for my wife, but it's not possible for her. It's a long story, but she can't come to the UK. Okay, so what do? So I find a job teaching English to a Spanish family where the deal is we can live in a part of their house. My wife does have documentation for Spain, so we do that. So here I am. I've come from being swanning around on Gulfstream jets. I'm now teaching a 7-year-old English in a house in Galicia. Very nice house in Galicia with a woman with children, and she was lovely, and she was very good to us. However, it's a bit of a change in circumstances, as I'm sure you can appreciate. At the same time, I'm doing 12, 15 hours a day on this project, which we've decided to do. So it was very, very tough, but it's a different kind of tough. I think this is really my point. This is a different kind of tough to the tough it is living with a wife who is not your real wife and living a life which is not your real life. When you serve God, when you decide I'm going to follow this path no matter what, you are going to get toughness, but as it says in the Quran, with hardship is ease. And this is true. There's a fundamental peace that comes from knowing you're doing the right thing, that it's undeniable. And anyway, to continue with my story, we were there, I can't remember how long, 6 months, something like that. Then we stayed with some friends in Valencia again for a couple of months. And then something changed. Some other guy had taken the British government to court. It's a long story, but the British government was basically not keeping its own rules. My wife's documentation should have been sufficient for her to come to the UK, or at least as a guest. And anyway, eventually this Irish guy took the British government to court and won. And that meant that we could go to the UK, which is where we currently are, although probably not for very long. So now we are together, we're renting a place here. Well, I'm renting the place here. My wife has got no recourse to anything here. She's, persona non grata in the UK. We still got hardships, etc. But we've done it. 2.5 years later of me working, I can now say that the Quran, a complete revelation as a work, is done. And that was my task. And are things great and easy? No, they're not great and easy. But when you decide to serve God alone, the world is not going to go, yeah, great, we're going to help you. It's going to kick up a lot of dust in your eyes. And in some way, you have to just close your eyes and trust the inner vision. And this is what the Quran gives you. It is a guide. And if you're trusting that guide, you don't see the reward, but you know that you have the reward. And all I can say is that over time, new habits form. The old habits of, looking at women and thinking unedifying thoughts, and those fade away over time. It's a habit over practice. In Russian, the word is второй дно. It's like a second, like a box might have you pull up and you realize that there's a further like a level within it. This is what happens. You acquire an inner vision. And what I can say is that since we made this decision, God has never let us go without. We've never had a huge amount. It's never been, like it was working and all of this stuff. And sometimes you think, oh, wouldn't it be nice, X, Y, Z? But would it? Would it really be nice? Would it really be nice to sit through those awful meetings, trying to help these fundamentally revolting people protect their reputations or whatever it is that one did? Compare that with what we're doing now. So what I'm trying to say is that if you are going through a difficult time, and if you have decided to serve God alone, and you are going through, life seems to be throwing all these rocks at you, I would take that as a confirmation in some way. Just because you're getting rocks doesn't mean you're serving God, right? Let's be clear on that one. But if you have decided, and God will test you on this, He's tested us, but it's a confirmation is that you do get a peace. And the more that you invest in that inner vision, that truth, the dearer that becomes to you. I said this in a comment to somebody who wrote to me. The more you dig the field that you were given to dig, the more you build the building that you were given to build, the dearer that becomes to you. And the less thinkable it becomes walking away. No, I've put so much into this. If your investment, and this was the point that when I was dealing with this very rich guy, I remember thinking, you can't take this with you. 19, 20 billion, you've only got a set amount of time. And time, it goes like that. And it was the vanity of it all. Whereas when you do serve God alone, you know that you have your reward. The Quran tells us, those who believe in God in the last day and do good works, they have their reward. I think that the point of the reward is not emphasized enough by many believers themselves. We're in it not because this is, we're somehow masochists of some kind. We want a difficult life. No, we want the highest rewards. And, but I don't like to use the word shaitan because it doesn't seem right to paint a lot of people with this brush. But fundamentally, most people are going to hell. We know this from the Quran. And it's not a pleasing thought, but it is true. So most people that you're going to meet are not going to encourage you to the garden. They're not. And if your inner voice, your inner quest is in conflict with their material or social requirements, they will fight you. They fought everybody. Look and read. Read about Ibrahim, Musa, Nuh, Salih. Oh Salih, you were one in which we had hope. We thought we were expecting great things from you, Salih. Oh, how you've disappointed us. Read these examples. Now, I met Mormons recently, just on an aside, which is why I've been looking into Mormonism. They have a great life, Mormons. They have a wonderful society, but they're believing a lie. And I think a lot of them, deep down, if they ever stop working, they realize that the intelligent ones, that it is a lie. And it is a lie. And I'm not being horrible about Mormonism, but it evidently is a lie. But it's very difficult to leave because people are locked into it because it's a good life. Why would you walk away from a good life? We have to make a decision alone. And you do find yourself asking, where is the help of God? And it says that the help of God is near. And it is. But you have to make that decision alone. And if it's not your decision, if it's not something that you really think is important, stay in the world. Because this isn't something you should go into half-heartedly. You basically, for us, knowing what this task entailed, we had to go into it knowing that we would lose all of our family and friends, probably. I haven't lost all of my family in the end, but they don't understand what I'm doing and why. One brother. I have quite a large family. My youngest brother is the only person. And I sent out, when I finished this project, one of the first things I did, the August release, was any money I had from selling the book, I used to buy my own book. And I sent out over, 20, 25 copies. The only person who's read any of it is my youngest brother, who's paid any attention to it at all. I think the others think they would be doing me a favour in reading any of it. But they've had their opportunity, they've had their chance, and you can only do what you can do. Most of my cousins and people like that, only one of them even acknowledged receipt. My life's work. If I'd written a book on gender studies and diversity amongst 5-year-olds or something, that would have been wonderful. They would have, especially if it'd been reviewed by The Guardian. But this work, no, it's not interesting to them. You stand alone, ladies and gentlemen. You do. You also have to bear in mind that you've got past sins. I certainly did. Unless you're very different to me, you have too. And those don't just go away because you decided to serve God. You've still got those. And, we're living under law. There's like law of physics. This isn't Christianity. You just press a button and suddenly, everything Jesus 2,000 years ago took away your... No, this is reality. The sins of your past, they're still on, your account. So there's that to be taken into consideration as well. But you learn things. You learn determination. And you learn to fight. And you learn, what إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You learn what that means. Thee alone will we serve, and from thee alone will we seek help. They're big words, but we will learn the meaning of them if we are to be true believers. This is a high calling. God says in the Quran that he will fill hell with men and jinn. Fill it. So if you are called to serve God, you're honored, I would claim. But what is valuable, what is worth having is not free. It just isn't. Now, I'm going to give you some of the upside. The one great thing, and for me the greatest thing, is I'm not afraid of death. I quite often think when I leave my house, I may not come back. There are some crazy people in the world, and if you know my work, I'm telling 1.6 billion Muslims that they haven't done their homework. And there are a lot of really nutty people in the world, and a lot of reasons even outside that fact why what I'm saying and what I'm doing isn't going to be popular at this time, to do with not only just the Islamic world, but to do with realpolitik, about the enforced mass movement of peoples across the world in order to pursue certain ends that don't ever get talked about on the tax farm. So there's that, but I'm not afraid. That's a huge thing. Second thing, I'm 50 years old, or I'll be 50, God willing, in August. And I don't have a midlife crisis. I have now done what I was meant to do. I can't tell you how much that's worth. Now, I don't know what you're meant to do, but I know that if you're listening this far into this talk, you've got something to do. I can also say that however many years later, I am very happily married. And God has blessed me with a wife who, and I'll tell anybody who listens, couldn't have done this without her. Couldn't have done this without her. Her support, her faithfulness, her warmth, her kindness, the fact that she doesn't sit there saying, oh, I'd much rather have a new car than finish this project. Those things, you really find out who somebody is when you have to bite the bullet on the practicalities. As far as my son goes, he's now 18. He came to live with us the first chance he got, and he's now abroad studying something. But he's had an opportunity to see his father fulfill his mission, and that's worth a lot. He's read through the translation. He prays. He's fasts. He's made that decision for himself. I don't push it on him. Why would I do that? La ikraha fid din. But would he have done this if I had stayed? No. So all I can say is I can't tell anyone else what decisions they should make as regards their big decisions. It's not my place. What I will say is that I recommend that you read the Quran on the subjects of marriage, and read the examples of the prophets. Look at Ibrahim. We live in an idolatrous time. The religions are amongst the biggest idol worshipping industries that there are. And make your decision for yourself. But God is the best ally. I quite often feel that in our life that people keep asking, well, what are you going to do next? Now you've done this, what are you going to do next? What's next? I don't know. I don't. And I'm comfortable with that. I do everything that I can do. I've got loads to do with I'm releasing different, the translation only version of the book, and etc., etc., etc. But what next? I really don't know. If we get a real invitation to go and live anywhere in the world, somebody says, I've got, 100 acres and I want to start a community in country X, will you come? I'm certainly going to have a look. I'm really open for anything. But I'm not compromising and I'm not stopping. Because I've got so much invested now in a high place and a clear conscience on the Day of Judgment. I'm giving up anything else. So that's me. Don't expect the world to understand, and don't wait for it to catch up. be good to your parents and understand that a lot of people don't like it when you change. But they will, if they love you, accept your choices. And if they don't, they are not going to be able to answer for you on the Day of Judgment. You will have to answer for yourself. So choose wisely and be happy with your choice. That's all for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Quran free using the button in the top right hand corner, or buy the hardback there at 10% less than on Amazon. I also encourage you to sign up for the Quranite Plus newsletter on the site to get occasional micro updates. Check my site at skypetalking.com for lessons and more. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.